Good afternoon. My name is John Lindahl. I'd like to welcome you to the Nebraska State Historical Society's Brown Bag Lecture Series, held here at the Nebraska History Museum every third Thursday of every month. A detailed schedule for this series, as well as information about all the Historical Society's programs and the services, can be found on our website at nebraskahistory.org. Before I introduce today's speaker, I want to thank the Nebraska State Historical Society Foundation for funding the filming of these lectures. Their financial support allows us to tape and broadcast these programs on public access television. We have a real treat today. Our speaker is Captain Joyce Citta with the Lincoln Police Department. Captain Citta has over 34 years of law enforcement experience, including commanding the Personnel and Training Unit. He's been involved with community services, inspections, and planning, and has spent 10 years as a team captain for one of Lincoln's geographic police teams in the downtown University area. Her current assignment is the commander for Management Services Unit. She holds a BA and a MAA from Doane College and teaches law enforcement classes in the state of Nebraska. She's an instructor for responsible hospitality service in the liquor industry, is a guest instructor at several colleges in the area, and has taught a senior graduate level course in criminal justice at the University of Nebraska. Her topic today is the history of the Lincoln Police Department. Please welcome Captain Joyce Citta.
Good afternoon. It's really wonderful to be here, and it's really great to be here because I get to talk about my favorite subject, and that's the Lincoln Police Department. Actually, I'm going to give you just a little bit of history about the Lincoln Police Department because we have so much, and I was so anxious to show you all the pieces and all the parts and everything we had that I showed the chief the PowerPoint, and it was over 100 slides. He said, "Did they give you 6 hours?" I said, "No, I obviously need to trim this down just a little bit." So I think we'll go ahead and get started, and I have hopefully left some time for questions, and if no questions, I have a whole nother series of slides to show you. Here's a couple of great pictures of our Lincoln police officers way back when. On your left would be an officer from probably about the early 1900s, and we know that because of the badge he's wearing, his hat badge and his shirt badge. We know that that star badge comes in between 1910 and 1915. And I can't really see the badge on the other officer, but because of the wreath he is wearing on his hat, we know that that's probably from prior to 1900, probably in the late 1800s. We have a wonderful web page, the police department does, and on that is a whole history web page. So you can go to our history site, and our history is written there, a very short history. Lots and lots of people on the police department over the years have contributed to that site and the information there. But I certainly encourage you to go out there and look, and don't forget to click across the top there at all of these links because we have it by decade. So you can look up every different decade of the police department and see what we know about it. Just to give you a little history of how the Lincoln Police Department started, Lincoln, of course, was a village back in 1870, and the village board was a little concerned about some of the goings-on and the different criminal activity in Lincoln. Not much has changed. They decided they needed a police department, and they took the Constable Richardson, and made him Marshal Richardson, which would have been the first police chief, as we know it, in the city, and they appointed 3 other officers, another one for day, 2 more for nights, and that's what was patrolling Lincoln back in 1870. By 1871, the city has become a city. Lincoln is now a city, and an election is held with the city council, and we elect a marshal at that time. And Marshal Hastings is elected, and there is a total of 4 officers plus Marshal Hastings, making 5 people on the Lincoln Police Department. We continue with elected marshals up until 1879, when Marshal Lyman's elected, but the following year in 1880, he becomes an appointed chief of police, and we have appointed the chief of police for the Lincoln Police Department ever since that time. And here is the part of the webpage that has the chiefs of police on it, and you can see if we could find a picture for them. They're listed, and we keep acquiring them. I've actually got 2 more that we don't have up yet that we'll be putting on, but it lists all the chiefs. So it's a really great spot to go and look and do some research. Because we were interested in finding out as much as we could about our chiefs of police, we were looking into each one of them, finding newspaper articles, finding information, anything we could find. And one day, Chief Rickard, who was the chief in 1909 for 1 year, and he was on the department many years beyond that and before that, but he's chief for 1 year. His granddaughter shows up at our front desk and says, "Hey, we were going through a bunch of boxes. Would you like some of these things?" And brings us great old photos, newspaper articles, original newspaper articles, and information about Chief Rickard. So gladly, we invited her back and started to talk to her, getting lots of information. You can see right here that the chief decides that only men 6 foot tall or taller are going to be allowed to be Lincoln police officers. And then he's also saying that he's going to spend a little bit more time watching and looking at the dance halls in town, because that's where disruptive behavior and drinking was occurring. So he wanted to pay a little more attention to that. The nice picture here is his 3 badges. This is our first badge, and we'll show you those here in just a minute, and we've actually just had replicas made of those because all we had were photos, so we're pretty excited to have that. And then 2 star badges and his handcuffs, which don't look anything like the handcuffs we carry today. This piece right here is actually from our logbook, our handwritten logs that the desk sergeant kept. And this is Chief Rickard stepping down as the chief of police and being appointed as a patrolman for the Lincoln Police Department. During another speaking engagement Chief Cassidy was at, he met a lady named Mary Hunt. And Mary Hunt says that she is the step-granddaughter of Pete Johnstone. This was Chief Peter Johnstone, and that her great-grandfather was James Malone, another chief of police for the police department. Johnstone was our chief from 1919 to 1930, so he was with us for quite a long time. Pretty unusual in those days. A lot of times chiefs changed with administrations and sometimes even yearly, so they could change every year to 3 years. But Johnstone was with us for quite a while and actually ended up retiring in 1930 after the great bank robbery in Lincoln. And if you know about the famous Lincoln National Bank robbery in 1930, it happened at 12th and O Street. There was some question about how the Lincoln police officers handled that. I believe a couple of our officers approached the bank, were confronted by heavily armed bank robbers, told to leave. They did. So probably a wise choice on their part. But he resigned shortly thereafter, and that was known as the largest bank heist in the United States at the time, where those robbers got over $2 million from the bank. And then James Malone, he was actually our chief 3 different times in our history, and he is featured in a book which a number of us have read and just love, The Last Posse, here written by Gail Christensen, and it details the prison escape, the murder at the prison, the cross-country posse chase, and James Malone was involved in that. So we were all pretty interested in how that happened. We also have done a great deal of work. Former Officer Dave Thurber and Jane Graff wrote the history of the Lincoln Police Department about 12 years ago. Lots of research, lots of information, so really nice book that we have. We re-released it again 2 years ago with 10 years of additional information there. I thought you'd be interested in some of our photographs. This photo was taken down at 10th and Q, which was one of our stations, and Patrolman Major Gross is this gentleman right here. And he's known as the first motorcycle officer for the Lincoln Police Department. This is a page from our history book, and you can see that Major Gross's picture, the one I just showed you, is here. This one was donated by Darlene Toll Pettit out of Omaha, because her grandfather, I believe, is the gentleman driving the paddy wagon right there. And he is also the gentleman on the motorcycle. So we've had lots of help from lots of people. And We're not the first group of officers to go looking into our history. Back in 1950, I found this newspaper article, and Patrolman Ed Murphy from the Lincoln Police Department has this put in the Lincoln Journal-Star and says, anybody know these people? Have no idea who they are. And he's asking. Now, I can tell you that this gentleman we know is J.C. Early. He is the first African-American officer that we know of on our Lincoln Police Department. But other than that, we really don't have any information. So anybody out there that knows anything, we'd sure love to hear and get that information. We haven't been in very many buildings as a police agency, so I thought you'd like to see these. These are actually in our building. We have a wonderful collection of old photos that line our building walls, and one set of them are all the buildings that the Lincoln Police Department's been in. So this one was the first one we know of that was built as a city government building. It had the fire department, the police department, a couple other agencies in it, and it would have been on the northwest corner of 10th and Q Streets. This building was built in 1886, and we stayed in that station until 1932 when we moved around the corner, and we moved to this building at 10th and Q, which a number of you may remember. And the police department, once again, is off here to the right side, and you can see a number of the old vehicles there. And a little bit closer shot of our vehicles, and this one would be, these are 1968. We then moved down to what was the address at the time of 555 South 10th Street. You can tell it's a fairly old photo. Here is where the new city-county building is, and that's a parking lot. And we can tell this is unusual in the fact that here's two older cruisers. The one on the left is an old black and white, which we drove up until 1976, and here's a blue and white. And this is actually an old park ranger car, because the park rangers in Lincoln were brought in and became Lincoln police officers, and we took their cars too. But we painted one blue and white as we're trying out the new color scheme that we're going to have with a new chief, new uniforms, and new cars. And so we were here for 10 years, from 1969 to 1979, but in 1979 they moved us to a temporary location where we stay for 21 years. This is 233 South 10th, and you'll probably recognize that because we were most recently there up until February 14th of 2000 when we moved back to the new address of 575 South 10th Street, which is the Hall of Justice, has Lancaster County Sheriff, Lincoln Police Department, courts, and county attorneys. One of the things we're really proud of that we have inside the station, we've got great displays. We were able to build in some display, and we're able to display our artifacts. So we're pretty proud of those. And this one came back to us recently. Lieutenant Marv Morgan is retired. He was our identification lab manager for a number of years and worked on the police department. And this was the mugshot camera. And Marv used this for pretty much all the years that he worked on the police department. You can see the great carved stand. And it had a slide, so you could take that forward picture and that side picture that you needed. And he used this frequently and often, but when we were getting ready to replace the cameras, we were tossing them out. Couldn't get the film for them anymore, not usable. Marv couldn't bear to toss out this camera, fortunately for us. He saved it, took it with him, and brought it back to us 2 years ago. So we're the proud re-owners of our original mugshot camera. And there's a mugshot that was taken by that camera. So you can see that took actually fairly good pictures for its day. This is just a quick shot. You can see behind the glass here we have a nice glass enclosed case that has our uniforms and the mugshot camera. And on the wall in our commons area are the information and the photos of all of our fallen officers with the Lincoln Police Department. Thought you might like to hear a little bit about our badges because we've only worn 4 different badges in the 140 years we've been a police department. This is the first badge, and again, we've just done a replica of it because we have not been able to find a real badge. All the rest of them we have. But started off with what they call in the logbooks a star. It's actually a star with a shield around it, but it is referred to as a star, and this happens to be Chief Rickard's badge. But then, March 14th, 1910, and I'll tell you how we came across these books because they're really fascinating, but we have the handwritten logbooks that we are looking through, thanks to the Nebraska State Historical Society. They've been great. They pointed us to those, and we see that on March 14, 1910, that Captain McGuire and all the officers were turning in their old stars, and they called that first badge a star. And then each officer is given the 5-pointed star of this department. So we believe that's when this badge got issued. This one says Police Lincoln, very little ornamentation. It's a very plain badge. We think that is the 1910 issued badge because this is the badge we actually have in our display. And it's much more intricate, much more detailed, and it says Lincoln Police, so the wording is reversed. We wear that star badge up until the early 40s when, with a new chief, we have new uniforms and a new badge. So with Chief Joe Carroll, we take on the shield badge that the officers wore up until 1976. And this is our current badge that we still wear today. And that again came with a new chief. I'd like to also mention the Nebraska Memories Project. I think our chief posted a blog with some photos, old photos, and they found them and called us right away. Would you like to participate in this project? And we did. So they have a number on their website of our old photos, and they have all of our old annual reports from 1941 to 1970. Back to some more pictures. This is the first known picture of the Lincoln Police Department. It's from 1885. It is the day force. We know all this because they wrote on the photo, so it's all there for us. But in 1885, this is the day force. Right in the center, seated, is Chief Beach, and then his 4 day force officers. In those days, Lincoln police officers worked 12-hour shifts, 6 to 7 days a week, and you needed a slip from a doctor if you weren't going to appear at work. And if you didn't bring a slip, then we'd send the city doctor out to check on you, see if you could come to work. We've got plenty of entries where officers called in not able to work, too sick. Out goes the city doctor, back comes the officer and the city doctor. Another shot of our webpage, and we do, on these decades, we have amassed as many of the old photos as we can, and we were actually pretty good about taking large group shots on a repeated basis. So you will find a really nice sampling of 8 to 10 items per decade. We've got thousands more per decade, but this is what we've been able to put out so far. On this particular shot, Chief Mellick is seated here in the center. We don't have the names for the rest of the officers. But in 1888, with Chief Cooper, somebody managed to research, and it does have all the names of all the officers, and it's glued to the photo. And back here it makes a note in the corner, in the doorway, is a man by the name of Matt Bracken. And Matt Bracken fed the prisoners that were brought in by the Lincoln police officers for 10 cents a meal. Another photo, this is the one about Chief Mellick. But you can see on occasion our drivers, our wagon drivers, were civilians, and sometimes they were commissioned. In this case, he's wearing a uniform, so we're really sure he's commissioned. And we know that they required all the officers to be present because here's the log entry that says all officers of the police force reported to the station by request of the marshal to have a photograph taken of the force in group. This is a photo from 1900 of Joseph Haney, and Joseph was one of our wagon drivers because his hat badge right here says driver. So we figured that was a clue. And this great photo of the paddy wagon, or our horse and wagon, which was called the Black Mariah. The reason they called it that, the wagon was painted black, the horse was black, but it's also a tradition across the United States, as far as we can tell, that the paddy wagons for police departments were all called Black Mariah. In fact, way up into the 40s when we get a wagon, Chief Carroll names the black and white painted wagon the Black Mariah. Now you'll notice here in the lower corner, this is a matron for the Lincoln Police Department. She has her hair up in a bun, long black dress, badge on her dress, just like the men are wearing on their uniform coats. When my staff first saw this, they asked, "Is that you?" No, it's not me. But I can tell you that 75 years later, when I first became a police officer in the city, for a different agency, we did start, and we wore skirts. So even though women have been on police agencies for a long time, we didn't get out of skirts for quite a while, about 1976. This is a composite with the force and Chief Johnstone. And we continue doing composite pictures. This is Chief Walter Anderson in 1938, and then Chief Carroll in 1946. We continue to do these until the end of Chief Carroll's reign as the police chief, and then we move on to individual photos with the police officers. One of my interns noticed that even though we've actually got a really good record of all the men that were police officers with the police department, we didn't have a really good record of the matrons or the women. So she took it on herself, because almost all of this work is done by our intern staff, and found records for all the women that work for the police department and has those recorded. And we've got a really nice Excel spreadsheet of everybody who's been a Lincoln police employee. This is a great story, and boy, would I love some help with this one. This photo arrived in the mail with a note saying the donor was a retired Washington State police officer. He was going through his aunt's estate and her belongings, and he found this photo, and on the back it said Lincoln Police, Nebraska. He knew the family had some connection to Lincoln, but nothing else. And he sent it to us knowing that police departments kind of like to collect their old history. Well, we did, and thanks to Ed Zimmer, he looked at it and he dated it for us. We know it's right around 14th and O, so there's officers standing in the middle of the street at 14th and O. We still do that today, only we're doing it at bar break. But Ed was able to tell us that this is probably in the early 1920s, so we have no idea who the folks are. Repeated calls back to the family. Can't quite get a name, so we don't have a starting point. But if anybody comes across anything, we'd sure be interested. We did find the first court case for Lincoln. This is the first case tried in the police court. It's docket number 1. It's from May 19th, 1871. Has anybody got an idea what it would be? It's a drunk downtown. Imagine that. This came to us from Sheriff Terry Wagner. It was donated to him because it was actually created by the Sheriff's Association in Nebraska back in 1927. This magazine didn't publish for very many years and has morphed into other things, but he noticed there was an article about the Lincoln Police Department in it. He knew we were collecting these things, so he brought it forward, and here again is Chief Johnstone. And the nice thing about this is every single person on the police department in the unit they're with has been photographed and ID'd and named, so just love this kind of information. This, on the top here, is the motorcycle squad. And our 2 matrons, who were Dora Doyle, she's this lady, and Edith Rickard, right here. And they were both with the police department for a long period of time. Here are the 2 drivers, a day driver and a night driver, the sergeants, who were dressed just a little bit better than everybody else. These are all the officers, and they're all named. So great addition for us to be able to have that. These are the detectives. And this is a shotgun squad. Never heard of a shotgun squad. Did a lot of work through the newspapers. My interns were busy searching high and low, online and with microfilm. But what we found was that way back in the early 20s, there was a number of street crimes, a number of crimes at businesses, and the people of Lincoln were getting a little upset. So the police department came out after, what brought it to a head was a service station attendant was gunned down in the early 20s. And the shotgun squad was then formed by the insistence of then Captain Walt Anderson. Walt goes on to be one of our police chiefs. So he would assign 2 officers to the shotgun squad. They were on motorcycle. One of them drove the motorcycle, and the other one's in a sidecar with a pump-action shotgun. So that was our shotgun squad. This shows only 2 squads. There's actually eventually 3, and it's evidently quite an interesting assignment. A lot of officers have taken that. This is what we spend a lot of time with, and every one of my interns participates in. But this is a photo of one of the old handwritten logbooks that the desk sergeant would keep, much like we do today, only it's all computerized. But then they would handwrite in the book everything that was going on, every call coming in, where every officer was. So it was a daily record of what was happening in the police department. This goes back to the 1880s. And I guess I don't know how far up they go. I haven't gotten that far. We haven't gotten through all of them yet, but we're working at it. Really interesting things that we found in here. Back then, they issued policies, just like we do today. This is our policy book today. Back in 1889, Marshal Carter issues the policy that all the officers have to report in at the station or on their beat by phone every time they come to work and when they leave. We have that same policy today. So he issues that order in 1889, and here's a copy of a page in the logbook where there's the officers reporting in every single hour. So November 8th, 1891, the officers are calling in from the call boxes downtown and checking in with the desk. Now, I didn't have a call box from then, but this is a call box from probably the 40s, 50s, 60s up until 1975. Did you walk a beat, call in on the call box? And those call boxes use keys that look like this. And even though we haven't used a call box since 1976, a lot of us still carry the old brass call box key. It's sort of a status symbol that you've been around for a while. I've certainly been around for a while. I should have told you that one of my friends on the department introduces me as the oldest living female officer on the Lincoln Police Department. I guess that's a good thing. Makes it appropriate that I'm doing the presentation, I suppose. This is kind of a sad entry that we found. At 11:20 p.m., an officer is detailed to 1527 M Street. There's a baby on the doorstep. They also send the matron, and pretty soon call back and said, we need the wagon. The matron can't, even though we've got an officer there, the matron can't carry the baby and all the clothes and all the things that the baby has. We notify the city doctor. He says unless the baby's sick, he's not going out. And pretty soon we've got the wagon coming back with the matron. The poor baby was left on a fraternity doorstop. 11:20 at night, and the police, of course, are called. Same thing would happen today. What I find fascinating is that this blue note was taped or pinned to the baby's clothing, and we glued it into the logbook, and then wrote, our logs. But what it says is, kind friends, this is a legitimate child born of strong parents. His father died 2 months before the baby's birth. I'm the mother, and I have been thrown on my own resources. I'm forced to make my own living. Please either give or find a good home for this little fellow. So pretty sad, but our evidence is glued in the book. And this notation from Thursday, May 30th, 1889, to show you how different things happen nowadays. The wagon is sent to O Street between 11th and 12th on a telephone call because there's a body. Well, the officer returns, and he's got a human skeleton in a box. It was in the outhouse in the alley, 11th to 12th and to O. And Marshal Cooper says, well, take it over the city dumping ground and bury it. So much different response than we had in 1889 than we would have today for that very same thing. This entry is from Thursday, September 26, 1889, and it says, Officer Ireland is given 14 notices to serve on all the saloons in his district from Mrs. Ella Ellen to sell no intoxicating drinks to her husband, Alfred Ellen. Wouldn't that be cool? We've got all kinds of little gems like this. The really fun part of doing this is finding things we had no idea, no clue that they even happened. We didn't know that President Harrison had visited Lincoln, Nebraska. He visited May 13th, 1891, and I think you have heard from Dr. Timothy Mahoney, who wrote about the great Sheedy murder, and they actually stopped the Sheedy trial so everybody can go down and see President Harrison. So our officers, and our notation in the book says that our officers are going to be on horseback, and they are going to escort him around the city. That really means that they get him from the train station over to the state capitol building so that he can make his speech. But we've got 5 or 6 officers on horseback. Well, we're fascinated by this, and we're looking for a picture of our officers on horseback because we've never really seen one. We still haven't found one, so if anybody runs across one of those, we'd certainly like to do that. But in keeping with the way things go, there's a newspaper article that we ran across in looking at what happened when President Harrison was here. He actually was on a whistle-stop tour across the United States, stopped here in Lincoln for an hour or so, and gave a speech, met a few people, and got back on the train. But while he was here, and everybody's gathered to hear him speak, the Fleming's jewelry at 12th and O is broken into. local ne'er-do-wells have decided to relieve the jewelry store of some of its product, but they got in because they left the back door open. Now again, the report's all here in the book. Well, I mentioned Dr. Tim Mahoney because one night I'm kind of dinking around on the internet and I find his website about the Great Sheedy murder, and it's so fascinating. I'm hardly going to sleep that night. I'm looking, and in the morning I'm emailing it to everybody. Look at this, look at this. Of course, I couldn't wait to get in and get over the Historical Society archives and see, did we have a call about Sheedy's murder? And we did. This is actually the first time Sheedy is attacked, and it says that Captain Carter reports to the station that while John Sheedy was going through the gate at his home with Mrs. Sheedy, a man crouched down in the shadows of the east gate post. He suddenly sprang up, fired a shot at Mr. Sheedy's head, then ran through the yard to the back gate and then up the alley east. The shot was fired at about 9:40 p.m. Mr. Sheedy was not struck. The man was described by Mr. Sheedy, and he goes on into the physical description. So that's the first attempt, and actually Dr. Mahoney talks about that. Then we find this note. This is the fateful call, and this is one I went looking for. January 11th, 1891, at 7:05 p.m., Officer Malone is detailed to John Sheedy's by a telephone call. Someone who said to send an officer in a hurry, Sheedy was shot. Sheedy was actually clubbed in the head with a cane, but we didn't know that till later. There was a real quick email on the computer to Dr. Mahoney. Hey, would you like to see the original call for service? He called immediately, and yes, he has, and we've had some great conversations and worked with him about this case. Then at 8:05 p.m., the Sergeant, Otto, and Officer Malone, who later becomes Chief Malone, returned from John Sheedy's and report that an unknown person was standing in front of Mr. Sheedy's door. As he stepped out to go uptown, now Mr. Sheedy owns the gambling house in Lincoln, and he struck him with a heavy cane, leaving a bad wound to his left temple. Sheedy fired 4 shots, and the man ran through the backyard and escaped. Then a day later, January 12th, reported in by Captain Carter that at 9:45 p.m. the previous night, John Sheedy died. On January 15th, we send 4 or 5 officers to his funeral. And our officers continue as part of the trial that's really detailed well out with Dr. Tim Mahoney's information. This is, we find these quite frequently, it's a page that's just logged into our book, and it's got every officer, their addresses, the fire keys they were issued, and their badges. Couldn't figure out the fire key. Quick call to Ed Zimmer results in that the fire boxes in those days could be triggered electronically from inside the businesses, but they were a spring-wound alarm that was on the corner to alert people that that's where the fire was. And they had to be rewound, so we're thinking, we don't know for sure, but we are assuming that the police officers carried the fire key because while the firefighters were going to the fire, we were out there rewinding the alarm box. This is a hand-drawn footbeat patrol, almost exactly what we're still doing today, and we found that also glued to the inside of one of the books. We did keep asking ourselves, gee, were we ever on horseback? And based on this article, we're pretty sure we were not. This is from 1908, and the headlines read, "Policemen prove their bravery by mounting ancient steeds to lead Bryan Parade." Well, we hop on one horse but miss the saddle, land on the rump of the horse, who rises up to his hind feet and prances down the sidewalk, dumping us underneath him. We get dumped by another horse when we try to get on him, and one of our officers actually gets on a pony. So we're kind of thinking we didn't ride horses except for parades. Andrea's here, and she put us onto this. She calls me one day and says, "I know you're looking at all this history stuff, and we're cleaning, and we found a microfilm, and it says a police journal, but we don't know what it is, and we're not open right now. So when we open, you'll have to take a look." Well, we discovered that in the there's a World Library catalog, and there was actually another copy of that down at the University of Nebraska. So I was able to go down there and look at it on microfilm. It's a wonderful old police journal written by one of the Lincoln police officers, Alva L. Pound. And it was sort of like the first hot sheet, all the wanted people, all the crimes that were occurring. But we kept hearing or reading these references in our logbooks about a dark lantern. Had no clue what a dark lantern was. But there in the police journal was an ad for a dark lantern. And it had a combustible source that sat inside of it, not a candle, but probably like a sterno, and it lit the dark. So it was the dark lantern. This journal also talks about a brand new invention called the flashlight that was coming out, and it wasn't like a flashlight today, batteries and the light, but you didn't slide it on, you pushed a button. And so it didn't stay on, you flashed to tell people where you were, to warn people about impending problems. So it was the new, much safer version of the dark lantern called the flashlight. We've also come across a number of a great collection of newspaper articles, and this is all about the last posse and the murder and mutiny at the prison. Thought you might be interested in this. Back probably in the 30s, 40s, 50s, they would send out fingerprint cards of different criminals, gangsters, and you would put them, we were using the Henry system then, which was a series of letters and numbers that identified each fingerprint, and you would file them, because they were exactly the size of a fingerprint card, in the file, and then if you had an unknown person come into your city, they wouldn't tell you who they were, you could compare them to the fingerprints on the card. So it was much faster today. Of course, we use the electronic version called APHIS, and we electronically send in all of our prints very quickly and get answers on who they were. And of course, we have this set of prints that our police department is taken by Everett Rudisil, who was in charge of our identification lab back in the day, and he rolled the prints for Starkweather. We have a number of private collections. I'll go through these real quick, give you a chance for questions here. But a number of our officers have, of course, collected things and brought them back. But this is Albert Maxey, who was an officer. And in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King came to visit in Omaha and do a speech, and Albert was assigned as one of the guards for him. So he's pretty proud of that. That actually hangs in his office today. He is a retired Lincoln police lieutenant. Bob Sawdon his children actually brought us a really nice collection of things that we have digitally scanned, and we have. This is Bob's office, so when everybody complains about their office space, we bring this one up, let them see that. And they're looking at a shoe, and I'm going, why are they looking at a shoe? Back to the newspaper archives, and they were chasing and foiled a burglary robbery of a business one night, and they had fired shots at the escaping prisoners. One of them, bullets hit the concrete, ricocheted back and went through the shoe of the inspector right here. So they were taking a look at that. This photo is unnamed, unmarked, and undated, and it is in Bob Sawdon's collection, but he was involved in the Charles Starkweather investigation, so we suspect that this would be a photo of Charles Starkweather. I wanted to let you know that we have this great group of annual reports. These are all available on our website. But I got a call one day from former Officer Dave Thurber, who was involved in the history book, and he says, I'm cleaning out some old cabinets over at the water department, and I found some old Lincoln City annual reports. He said, have you ever seen these? I'm like, no, but I want to. So we go take a look, and sure enough, he's got like a 1930 city annual, and we've never seen those. Checking around a little bit, of course, the city had an entire box of them, every single one starting in 1904. We borrowed them. Finance had kept every one. We're really good about holding on to things. And we were able to scan in the information about the city and about the police department. They're great. They have tons of information. We know what people made, their salaries, all about the city of Lincoln. It tells us how many running areas of paved streets we had, how many railway lines we had, so really good information about the city. But in 1914, we start listing the number of officers who are working for the police department. So we know exactly how many officers worked from 1914 on and are on our agency. And in 1914, we had 25. And then it goes into something that we still do today in our annual reports, and that's list all the crimes. So there's a really great listing of crimes there, although I don't think we've arrested anybody for bootlegging or a chicken ordinance violation lately. But those we did 6 bootlegging and 11 chicken ordinance. So we can go quite far back in our annual reports. One of the best things we found in these old city annuals was this photo. We'd never seen it before. It's from 1915. Don't know who they all are, but there again, there's our matron wearing her dress and her coat with her badge on the front of her her uniform. We continued in Joe Carroll's era. He starts having annual reports, and he continues doing annual reports, but this time they're just about the police department. The nice thing about his, he lists every single officer, their years on, and their assignment. Anybody in the city of Lincoln who has a relative who was on the police department, you want to track their assignments and what they did in the years they were on the Lincoln Police, this is all available on our city website, and you can look at those. This is the website. These are our current annual reports, and then at the very bottom of this page is a link that says older annual reports. I thought you'd like to see this photograph. I'm assuming they're going out on a special detail. This is 1967. I'm hoping it's not prostitution because I don't think they would do very well with that. Gotta hope it's a purse snatch. Probably the best picture ever. This is retired Captain John Hewitt. He was a sergeant then. He was actually off duty. He was just leaving the station when an accident came out on the Harris Overpass. He went down there to see if he could help out. And the child's not injured, even though there's blood on its shirt. The mother was injured, and it's mother's blood, and she's being taken away in an ambulance, but the child's crying, and everybody's trying to get their job done. So John picks up the child and carries it, and he had a couple of children of his own, and the child goes to sleep. So great picture. John passed away in December. We'll miss him, but a great photo for a great guy. Reading those old annuals, we found that William Hill worked for the police department for one day and died overnight. Hadn't heard that. It was in our annual report as a memorial to him. So went looking in the archives that we have, and actually from 1938 to current, we have newspapers. Every time the Lincoln Police Department is mentioned from 1938 on, somebody in our staff on the police department, usually the chief secretary, has cut out a newspaper article, and we've got scrapbooks. So we have cupboards and cupboards and cupboards of scrapbooks, but we find the newspaper article of William Hill. And I do want to tell you this story very quickly. This is Marion Marshall. The chief went last May to do the police memorial, and he's asked to read the names of the fallen officers for the Lincoln Police Department. And one more, Marion Marshall. We would never heard of Marion Marshall, nor his rank as a special police officer. Finding out, Marion Marshall was part of the group of special duty patrolmen who worked for the neighborhood and not for the police department. But they made arrests, and they brought people in, and they were paid for security services and police services. So he's actually has his name inscribed. He died in the line of duty, and his name is on the Nebraska Memorial. It's also on the memorial in Washington, D.C. But the chief wanted to know more about this, so a quick trip down to the archives, and he's reading the microfilm on the newspapers, and he finds out that special duty patrolman it says was shot in his Army uniform. He doesn't think that's right. He was a Marine. We don't think he'd be caught in an Army uniform. He's probably wearing his Marine uniform, which is how they did this. He was had been working for Lincoln Telephone and Telegraph. He was laid off in 1931, and he was one of 20 special duty patrolmen that the Charles A. Farley Post of the Veteran of Foreign Wars sponsored for neighborhoods. They were paid a small amount of money to patrol. They patrolled in their own vehicles. But shortly before midnight on September 7th, 1932, Patrolman Marshall saw a suspicious person. He contacts him. That person actually was Tom Hall. He was getting ready to rob the Capitol Hotel in downtown Lincoln. He thinks he's been made, and he shoots Patrolman Marshall, who manages to crawl over to the front steps of the governor's mansion, rings the doorbell. The governor comes down, dresses, finds Patrolman Marshall shot on his front step, gets the ambulance there. He's taken to the hospital, but Patrolman Marshall dies a couple days later of his wounds. That's his memorial in our station. This is Tom Hall's mugshots. He was actually tried within a couple of months. Trials were very quick back then. Found this newspaper article, and it is of other men in 1931 who were doing the same job. The chief posted this on his blog, explains it all, and the really great thing about this is a number of Patrolman Marshall's family members have found the blog, have connected with each other. Some of them didn't even know each other at the time. And so they've been talking back and forth with each other through the blog and filled us in on some other information that the family was pulled apart because a few years after Patrolman Marshall was shot, his wife died, leaving 3 children as orphans. They are sent to the winds. 2 daughters connect later in the years and have found each other. They're all in their 80s, but we can't find Charles. The 9-year-old son, we can't locate. We've tracked him through a number of different ways and have not been able to find him. He fell on some hard times. He spent some time in a couple of penitentiaries, for frauds and other related type crimes, but can't find him. Talk to the family on a regular basis, and they talk to us, so it's pretty fascinating. These newspaper articles include the police women that would come on and work. They handle women's issues, children. We also have this article, Officer Nick. He worked for us for over, I believe, 40 years. He retired at age 71 and died about 4 months later at the Lincoln Police Department. And our Matron Books. The chief has this Matron book in his office. Again, we were getting ready to move, and it was in a box. It looked like it was going in, out to the back trash. Didn't want that to happen. So this one actually sits in his office, and it details, and the matrons are really good. The entries we have from the desk sergeant, real short, not a lot of detail. The matrons write. So we've got wonderful information from their activities. They go out unarmed, alone, into the dance halls, and their job is to go out to the dance halls every night and check so that there's no unescorted women. They're thinking they're getting paid for their services, and they're looking for drinking and illegal activity, but the women are out there, the matrons are out alone, but that's part of their job is to go out there and check those. So we're finding out some really wonderful things about our past, the way we did things. We're finding out we do things very similar today in a number of ways, and that we still record the same information on every call that comes in. That's what I have, unless there's no questions, then I do have a whole other section, so. Oh, yes.
Thinking of events like the 1930 bank robbery and the Starkweather murders and things like that, what significant events, maybe they are examples and maybe not, what significant events have occurred in the history of Lincoln's Police Department that had a immediate lasting effect on how the police department conducts its operations or its resources?
Wow.
I was afraid it might be a little.
Yeah, I guess I'm sitting here with so many things. An incredible amount of the type of work we do even today is exactly like they were doing it back then. You go out, you talk to people, you're on the beat, you're available, you answer calls. All the calls are recorded that come in. It's just our evidence collection is much different. That certainly has been significant for us. Today it's very detailed. Then they put the bullet from the assault in the bottom left desk drawer. So we had a number of those. The body that was buried that came home, came to the station in a box. I think certainly the bank robbery, the way we go out and investigate and handle neighborhood issues that happen. Gosh, I'm just reeling here with so many things that we've had happen. What we're trying to do is get more of this information out on the web so people have access to it and are able to look at it. Today, we're very high-tech. Everything we do is high technology. They didn't want to lose the evidence in the old books, so they glued them in so they could find them. And then they'd have little pieces of paper sometimes stuck in there so that they could get back to it. Today, everything is electronic, digital evidence, being able to immediately get to the evidence, maintain chain of custody. So certainly we've learned a lot over the years. The way we patrol, the radio system, bringing a radio system online for officers was huge because back in the days all we had was call in on the call box, and you'd call in every hour to get your assignment, or there was a light that would flash that tell you we've got a call for you, call in. So those type of things. The radio's been a huge change for us, and now of course we have in-car computers, so we have the MDCs, mobile data terminals in the car. We've got a number of officers that have never been in a car without one of those. So if we turn one of those off, they'd be they'd probably be really upset. And I'm, of course, from the era of a pen and a piece of paper going out and handling what needed to be handled. So I've been around for way too long. I left my business card and email up there, so if you would like more detailed stuff, you can certainly pick that up and get hold of me. Other things? You want me to show a couple more pictures?
Did the newspaper article that you showed very early on in your presentation for Chief Rickard explain why he only wanted to hire 6-foot-tall officers?
I think it did. He thought he needed big guys, and wanted only large men on the police department that could handle anything that came up, because they patrolled alone till we get evidently to the shotgun squad. But they patrolled alone, and he wanted people that could just handle whatever needed to be handled. They have no communication. There's no way to get to any help. There's no radios. You have to find a phone. So either you're finding the phone on every street corner downtown, or you're in a business that has a phone and you can make that call. So I think he's just looking for people that could do that. Chief Rickard also decided that he didn't like the little whistle that we all still use today, and he got a Bobby's whistle. So he paid for and brought in the Bobby's whistle from England, and another relative here in Lincoln has that collection of some other old photos and things. He also kept track of all the people he arrested. Chief Rickard had an address book, and it had all the labels by letter, and everybody he arrested, he would write in the address book what the charge was and who they were, so he could keep track of that. And we've seen that book, but his family still has it, so we just have the digital photographs of it. We have a tremendous amount of things that we've been able to find. We haven't even gotten through probably half of the information we have available, but we're working very hard at it. We're using interns, and I have 2 interns a semester, 3 semesters a year, and one of their main jobs is to work on our historical preservation. So they're scanning, negatives have been scanned, photos have been scanned, newspaper articles are scanned. We're going through all the old scrapbooks, anything we can find. We're going through and trying to put together our history and our archives, and we've actually found a few things that we had wrong in some of the older photos that we had down at the department, because they've been confirmed. People are finding this on the Chief's blog, which is a wonderful spot to find the other historical information, and our website. Time's just about right? Yes.
Well, when did Lincoln Police women first actually get to carry weapons?
We'll have to go back and look at that. We hire female officers to go on patrol about 1975, 76. We actually have women officers before that, and they're police women. In fact, our old policy books call them police women. So we have policemen and we have police women. And their badges say police women. Hulda Roper held a badge that said policewoman, and she didn't have a gun. She wouldn't take an issued gun, but I think we've had a number of women shortly thereafter that did. And I actually have to go back and pull our property logs to see when they actually got weapons. Women in Nebraska, pretty much 75, 76 was about the first time they were hired to actually take patrol in a cruiser, regular uniform, just like the guys. Except for me, I had a skirt at first. It's weird.
Have you done oral histories? Do you have an oral history program?
We have asked our retired staff to do that. We've got a couple of them that have come in, not oral, they've actually written them for us. We figured they can write reports, they can write them. The first one we got was from Lieutenant Marv Morgan. He told us all about how the forensics worked back in his day, so in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Much different than today, but we've got great photos of him, fingerprints at scenes and everything. And then he tells us about how all this worked and things. But no, we'd love to do that, be very interested in it. We've asked them. They're a little shy, hard to believe. But several of them have written it out for us and have done a really nice job of that.
Is the Lincoln Police Department unique in all the stuff you have? I mean, are you aware of other police departments around the country that could compare?
Not with the quantity of things that we've found so far. In fact, when we were getting ready to put the website together, one of the intern projects was go out and look. What else is everybody doing out there? How are they putting together their website? And we looked at quite a few, but most people had just a small sampling. They certainly didn't have the old annual reports, and we have got all that available online. And we are trying to find a way now to put out all the newspaper articles we've got and all the photos, because we have thousands and thousands and thousands of these on digital, all filed or cataloged for us, and would just love to put them out. We're just trying to find a easy way to do this where it's convenient for folks and we can get that handled. I'm actually more than willing to take interns from any of the disciplines that would like to come in and figure that out for us. So. Yes, ma'am.
I seem to remember a newspaper article about when I think it was the sewer pipes broke around the city-county building, and one of the women in the police department went down and on her own charge account got refrigeration so that evidence could be,
Preserved.
yeah.
Actually, I think that might have been Pam Fitchie. That wasn't all that many years ago. Pam Fitchie has held a number of jobs at the police department. She was actually in our identification lab and was the fingerprint expert for a while, but she is head of our property unit, and she is responsible for that. And I know her staff was amazing when it was actually a water pipe that broke, and so they did all the work to preserve the evidence that we had, and were able to do that. So I'm being given the signal that we're done. And I'll stay a few minutes afterwards if people want to stick around and ask other questions. I'll be here. Thank you very much.